I found out what Bigfoot does with food offerings, and it changed everything I thought I knew about the mountains. I know that sounds impossible, but last fall, deep in the North Cascades, I saw something that no amount of training could explain. I'd been leaving simple winter food drops, nothing special, just part of a routine study. But something out there was watching and responding. The offerings didn't just disappear. They came back as arrangements, perfect circles of bones, feathers placed like symbols, objects cleaned and sorted as if someone understood exactly what they meant. And each time, the patterns grew more complex, more intentional. Then, one morning, I found items that should never have been in the wilderness at all. Old coins, a child's toy, a piece of clothing linked to a missing hiker. That was the moment I realized the offerings weren't gifts. They were part of a ritual. If this is what they've been collecting from us, what are they preparing for? October in the North Cascades isn't forgiving. I'd been doing this kind of work for 8 years, and I knew that going in. 47 miles from the nearest town, no cell towers, satellite phone windows twice a day if the weather cooperated. That was the deal. 3 months alone in the wilderness, studying black bear denning patterns for the University of Washington. $200,000 worth of equipment, a federal research permit, and enough freeze-dried food to last until December. I'd done solo fieldwork before 6 weeks, in Alaska, 2 months in Yellowstone's backcountry. This was supposed to be routine. Set up the station, establish my research grid, deploy trail cameras at likely denning sites, collect scat samples, document behavior patterns. The kind of methodical work that gets published in the Journal of Wildlife Management. The kind that keeps grant money flowing. The drive-in took most of the day. Forest Service Road, 2314, turns to gravel after mile 15, then gets progressively worse until you're basically following suggestions of a road. My truck, loaded with equipment, crawled those last 5 miles. The research station was exactly where the GPS said it would be. A one-room cabin built in the 70s, solar panels from a 2012 upgrade, propane tank, outhouse, luxury accommodations by field standards. I spent that first day unloading, organizing, checking equipment. The thermal cameras needed fresh batteries. The trail cams required proper positioning. Everything had to be cataloged, numbered, mapped. I'm particular about my data, double-check everything, verify coordinates, test equipment before deployment. My doctoral advisor used to say I was paranoid. I preferred thorough. By evening, I'd established a basic perimeter around the cabin, maybe a 100-meter radius where I'd focus my initial observations. The forest was already in full autumn, displayed Douglas firs and western hemlocks towering overhead, understory thick with sword ferns and salal. Classic Cascade ecosystem. Perfect black bear habitat. What struck me first was the silence. Not unusual for October, most birds had already migrated, and the coming cold had sent smaller animals into hiding. But this felt different, complete, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. Even my footsteps seemed muffled in the thick duff. I was marking trees with flagging tape, establishing reference points for my grid system when I found the first structure. About 80 meters northeast of the cabin, just inside the tree line. At first glance, I thought it was storm damage branches leaning against a massive cedar. But the angles were wrong. Too deliberate. 7 branches, each about 2 inches in diameter, all exactly the same length. I measured them at 6 feet, 4 inches. They were arranged in a TP formation, but with the tops woven together, in a pattern that would have required considerable dexterity. The weaving wasn't random. It followed a repetitive over-under sequence that created surprising stability. I pushed against it gently. Solid. My first thought was hikers, maybe some bushcraft enthusiast practicing shelter building. But the structure served no practical purpose, no room inside for a person, no weather protection, and the branches were green, freshly broken. The breaks themselves were odd, splintered in a way that suggested twisting rather than cutting or snapping. Each break point showed the same spiral fracture pattern. I photographed it from every angle, took measurements, made notes, documented it the way I'd document any anomaly in my research area. Unknown human activity, I wrote in my field notebook. Possible territorial marker or art installation. Will monitor for changes. The sun was setting by the time I finished, that golden hour light filtering through the canopy. I headed back to the cabin, already mentally organizing tomorrow's tasks. Deploy the first wave of trail cameras, establish the northern boundary of my study area, collect baseline environmental data. I made dinner on the propane stove, rehydrated chili, instant coffee, a couple of energy bars, ran through my equipment checklist one more time, uploaded the day's photos to my laptop, backed them up on the external drive. Standard first-day procedures. Before bed, I stood outside for a few minutes, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. No moon that night, just stars visible through gaps in the canopy. The silence persisted, no owl calls, no rustling in the understory. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. I remember thinking it would be a productive 3 months, quiet, focused, exactly what I needed for good research. I had no idea what I'd actually found. The first week followed a steady routine. Wake at dawn, coffee and oatmeal, check weather data, head out with equipment. I'd established a rough grid covering about 20 acres, with plans to expand once I had the core area mapped. Each day, I'd deploy more trail cameras, document potential den sites, collect samples. Methodical, thorough. By day 3, I'd found 12 more structures. They varied in design, but shared that same deliberate construction. Some were simple rocks stacked in cairns, too precise to be natural. Others showed complexity that made me question my initial assumptions. One formation used 32 stones, each roughly the size of a basketball, arranged in a perfect spiral. I spent an hour trying to find a viewing angle where it might be random. There wasn't one. The stick structures were even more puzzling. One looked like a primitive gate, 2 vertical supports with a crossbeam lashed using strips of cedar bark. Another resembled a giant bird nest, 8 feet across, woven from hundreds of finger-thick branches. The weaving pattern was consistent, almost mechanical in its after-so precision. I documented everything: GPS coordinates, photographs, detailed sketches, measurements. My field notebook filled quickly. I started a separate log just for the structures. Each one got a designation S1 through S13 with subcategories for type and complexity. On day 5, I noticed my trail cameras had been touched. Camera Station 4, positioned to monitor a promising den site near a creek, had been rotated exactly 90 degrees. The mounting strap hadn't loosened someone, or something had deliberately turned it to face away from the trail. I checked for prints around the tree. Nothing. The duff showed no disturbance, no broken twigs, no scuff marks on the bark. Camera Station 7 had been adjusted more subtly, tilted upward, just enough to miss anything walking at ground level. Again, no evidence of how it happened. I started checking all my cameras twice daily. By the end of the week, 6 had been repositioned. Always at night, always without, leaving a trace. The rational explanation was humans. Had to be. Maybe locals who didn't like researchers on public land. Maybe pot growers protecting their crop. But the cameras were expensive, obvious targets for theft. Why just turn them? And how did they move through the forest without leaving any sign? On day 6, I found the first prints. I almost missed them. Morning rain had created perfect conditions, a patch of mud near structure S7. The impression was clear, but didn't match anything in my experience. 17 inches long, 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. 5 toes, but the proportions were wrong for human. The big toe was more separate, almost thumb-like. The depth suggested something heavy. I estimated at least 300 pounds based on the depression. I made a cast using the dental stone from my sampling kit, photographed it with a ruler for scale, took soil samples from inside and outside the print. The scientific method, even when what you're documenting challenges scientific understanding. There were 3 more prints leading away from the structure, each about 4 feet apart, a stride that would be impossible for a normal human. Then they just stopped. Not at a stream or rock outcrop where tracks might naturally disappear. They ended in the middle of soft ground, as if whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. I spent that entire day searching for more prints. Found nothing. But I did discover structure S14, the most elaborate yet. It stood 9 feet tall, constructed from 4 different tree species, each branch stripped of bark and polished smooth. The joints were reinforced with what looked like pine pitch mixed with something else, maybe animal fat. It had a door-like opening facing north, and inside, a small platform made from woven grass. My scientific training said to remain skeptical. Document without assumption, consider all possibilities. But standing there, looking at that structure, something primitive in my brain was already whispering the truth. That night, I reviewed everything on my laptop. The structures mapped out in a rough circle around my cabin, all between 50 and 200 meters out. The repositioned cameras faced away from the structures. The prints led from one structure toward another. I uploaded everything to my backup drive and tried to write my daily research log. Spent 20 minutes staring at a blank screen before typing, "Significant anomalous activity in research area, unknown origin, continuing observation." The silence outside felt heavier that night. Expectant. I double-checked the cabin door lock before bed. Started sleeping with bear spray on the nightstand. Told myself it was just a precaution. I'd been reviewing trail camera footage for 3 hours when I saw it. October 15th, 2019. Camera station 12, positioned near a promising den site I'd identified on day 4. The timestamp, read 3:27 a.m. For 18 frames, about 6 seconds of footage, something moved through the left edge of the field of view. My first thought was a bear walking upright. It happens sometimes, especially if they're injured or carrying something. But the proportions were wrong. The figure stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long. The way it moved, fluid, purposeful, aware, nothing like an injured animal. I ran the footage through enhancement software on my laptop. Adjusted contrast, sharpened edges, slowed it down frame by frame. In frame 11, it turned slightly toward the camera, just enough to show a profile that made my hands go cold. The face was almost human, almost. The brow ridge was heavier, the jaw more pronounced. Dark hair or fur covered everything except areas around the eyes and mouth. The eyes themselves caught the infrared for just a moment, reflecting like any nocturnal mammals would, but positioned like a human's. Forward-facing, predator eyes. But what really got me was the expression. This wasn't some animal accidentally wandering past my camera. It looked directly at the lens for maybe half a second, and in that moment, I saw calculation, intelligence. It knew exactly what the camera was. I backed up the footage, watched it again, then again. 17 times total, according to my laptop's media player history. Each viewing revealed new details. The way it placed its feet, avoiding twigs that would snap, the slight crouch as it moved, keeping its head below the understory. The pause before it entered the camera's field of view, like it was deciding whether to let itself be seen. I checked the other cameras from that night. Station 11, positioned 40 meters away, showed nothing during that time frame. Station 13, even closer, had been turned to face a tree trunk sometime between my evening and morning checks. The rational part of my brain, the part with a PhD in wildlife biology, ran through explanations. Misidentified bear. Human in a suit. Pareidolia, making me see patterns that weren't there. But the biologist in me also knew what I was looking at. Body mechanics don't lie. The length of those arms relative to the torso, the way the knees bent, the muscle movement visible even through whatever covered its body, you can't fake that. Not at 3 a.m, not in the middle of nowhere. I exported the relevant frames, saved them in multiple formats, backed them up on 3 different drives. Documented everything in my field notes with the kind of detail you'd use for a dissertation defense. Time, location, weather conditions, camera settings, enhancement procedures applied. If I was going to claim I'd recorded something extraordinary, I needed extraordinary documentation. The rest of that day, I couldn't focus on actual bear research. I kept returning to my laptop, analyzing those 18 frames. I measured the figure against reference trees, calculated its height at 7 feet 4 inches, assuming normal proportions. Based on stride length and ground depression in subsequent footage, I estimated its weight at around 450 pounds. Those weren't human numbers. They weren't bear numbers either. I found myself checking the cabin windows more frequently, double-checking the door lock even during daylight. The bear spray moved from my nightstand to my belt. My father's compass, the one I'd carried since I was 12, stayed in my chest pocket where I could feel its weight. Touching it had become a nervous habit, a grounding mechanism when things felt uncertain. That evening, I tried calling my research supervisor on the satellite phone during the scheduled window. The connection was terrible, more static than voice, but I managed to explain I was documenting unusual wildlife activity that might affect my study. She told me to maintain protocol, keep detailed records, and we'd discuss it during my next resupply in 2 weeks. 2 weeks felt like a very long time. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me reach for the bear spray. Around 2 a.m., something walked past the cabin. Slow, measured steps on the wooden porch. It stopped at the window, and I could hear breathing, deep, rhythmic, deliberate. I didn't move. Didn't turn on my flashlight. Just lay there, hand on the bear spray, until the footsteps moved away. The next morning, I found the first gift. I'd decided to test something. If whatever was out there showed intelligence, maybe it would respond to intentional interaction. Classic behavioral research: provide a stimulus, observe the response. So I took a calculated risk. At structure S7, the elaborate one with the woven platform inside, I left an offering. Nothing fancy: 2 apples from my food supply, a pack of beef jerky, and half a loaf of wheat bread. I arranged them on a flat rock in front of the structure's entrance, photographed the setup, and positioned camera station 8 to monitor the site. I checked at noon. The food was gone. The camera had been turned 90 degrees to face the forest. But something had been left in place of the food. The arrangement was deliberate, almost artistic. 12 deer vertebrae arranged in a perfect circle. Inside the circle, raven feathers, 5 of them spread in a star pattern. At the center, twisted sweetgrass formed a small spiral. The whole thing measured exactly 18 inches across. I know because I measured it 3 times. Each component was pristine. The bones were clean, sun-bleached, no tissue remaining. The feathers were perfect, no damage to the veins. The sweetgrass was still green, recently picked. This wasn't random forest debris. Something had collected these items specifically for this purpose. I photographed it from every angle, then carefully collected each piece in separate sample bags. The scientist in me wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but the pattern was too deliberate, too thoughtful. I repeated the experiment over the next 3 days. Different locations, different food items. Each time, the offerings vanished within hours, replaced by increasingly complex arrangements. A geometric pattern of river stones, pine cones arranged by size in a perfect Fibonacci spiral. Once, a small figure woven from cedar bark that looked disturbingly like a human form. On October 19th, the exchange changed. I'd left the usual offering at structure S12, some trail mix, an orange, crackers. When I returned, I found items that shouldn't exist 47 miles from civilization. 3 coins a quarter from 1971, a penny from 1958, and what looked like a Canadian dollar. A plastic toy soldier, the kind from cheap bags of army men, sun-faded green to almost white. A camping spoon, bent but still usable. And most unsettling, Polaroid photograph, water-damaged beyond recognition, but clearly showing people, a family maybe. The edges were brown with age. My hands shook as I documented these items. These weren't forest objects arranged in patterns. These were human artifacts, things that had been carried here, kept, preserved. The coins showed minimal wear despite their age. The toy soldier had been cleaned recently, no dirt in the crevices. The spoon had been polished. Something was collecting human objects, had been collecting them for decades, based on the dates. That afternoon, I expanded my search radius, looking for more structures or signs. About 300 meters north of my cabin, I found a game trail I'd somehow missed in my initial survey. It was subtle, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. But once I found it, I could see it had been used recently and often. The path was worn smooth, branches bent back to create a corridor through the understory. I followed it for maybe 10 minutes before the sensation of being watched became overwhelming. Not just watched, studied. The forest was silent, except for my footsteps, but I could feel presence all around me, multiple presences. I turned back. Some instinct, maybe the same one that had kept my ancestors alive, told me I was approaching something I wasn't ready to find. Not yet. That evening, while reviewing my notes, I noticed a pattern in the gift exchanges. Each return arrangement seemed to respond to what I'd left. When I left fruit, I received plant materials. When I left meat, I got bones. The processed foods, crackers, trail mix had prompted the human artifacts. It was learning, testing me the same way I was testing it. I made detailed notes about each exchange, creating a matrix of offerings and responses. The pattern suggested not just intelligence, but curiosity. Whatever was out there wasn't just taking food and leaving random objects, it was communicating. The question was, what was it trying to say? That night, I heard them talking. Multiple voices, if you could call them voices. Low, resonant vocalizations that carried through the forest. Not howls or roars, something more complex. There was a pattern to it, a back and forth that suggested conversation. I recorded 43 minutes of it on my phone before the batteries died, despite being fully charged an hour earlier. The last thing I recorded was a sound that made my blood freeze. Between the deep vocalizations, clear as day, I heard my own voice. The words I'd spoken while documenting the gifts that morning, repeated perfectly. Specimen 17, raven feather, approximately 8 inches in length. Then silence. The handprints appeared on October 21st. I woke to find them covering the cabin's windows. Massive prints, fingers splayed wide, pressed against the glass from outside. The morning condensation made them perfectly visible. Each hand was nearly 12 inches from palm to fingertip. Human-shaped but wrong. The thumb was longer, more flexible looking, the palm wider. There were 17 prints total. I know because I photographed and measured each one before they faded. Some overlapped, suggesting multiple visits or multiple visitors. The highest print was 9 feet off the ground. But what disturbed me most was the small print among the large ones. A child-sized hand, maybe 6 inches long, pressed right at my eye level. The same elongated thumb, the same wide palm, just smaller. Whatever was out there wasn't alone. It had family. The exchanges escalated after that. I'd leave food. They'd leave increasingly personal items. A Coleman lantern from the 80s, still functional. A hiking boot, just one, size 11 men's. A wallet, empty except for a library card from Bellingham dated 1994. Each item was clean, preserved, curated. I started finding things that belonged to me. My favorite pen, lost 3 days earlier, appeared, balanced on a stump near structure S9. A sock that had gone missing from my laundry line. The backup batteries I'd sworn I'd packed but couldn't find. They were returning my own possessions, transformed into messages. On October 23rd, I made a mistake. I tried to be clever. I left a disposable camera with the flash disabled at one of the exchange sites. My thought was simple: if they were intelligent enough to understand GIFs, maybe they'd understand photography. Maybe they'd take pictures of themselves. The camera disappeared like everything else. The next morning, I found it at my doorstep. All 27 pictures had been taken. But when I developed them using my portable printer, they weren't self-portraits. They were pictures of me, sleeping in my cabin, working at my laptop, checking my trail cameras, eating dinner, walking the trails, all taken from impossible angles, through windows I'd thought were private, from positions that would have required someone to be in my cabin, feet from me, without my knowledge. The last photo showed the inside of my tent from my last resupply run, 2 weeks earlier. I'd been alone. I'd checked, but the angle suggested someone had been lying next to me. My hands shook so badly I could barely load the photos into evidence bags. The implications were clear. They'd been watching me from day one, maybe before. They knew my routines, my equipment, my vulnerabilities. The gift exchanges weren't first contact. They were just the first time they'd chosen to make contact obvious. That afternoon, I found a trail I'd missed before, marked by subtle bent branches that formed an arrow. Following it led me to a clearing where 7 of the structures formed a rough circle. At the center, items I'd left over the past week were arranged in categories. Food in one pile, manufactured goods in another, organic materials in a third. They weren't just collecting. They were organizing, categorizing, studying. Above the display, suspended between 2 trees, hung a warning. My missing sock, stretched between branches 30 feet up, too high for me to reach, too deliberate to misunderstand. They were showing me they could reach me whenever they wanted. That night, I considered abandoning the study, packing up, hiking out, never speaking of it. But I couldn't, not yet. The scientist in me needed to understand. The son, who'd lost his father to an unexplained wilderness disappearance, needed answers. So I stayed, and started sleeping with every piece of furniture pushed against the door. The cave changed everything. October 25th. I'd been following disturbed vegetation patterns, bent ferns, displaced moss, subtle paths through the understory that weren't quite trails. They led northwest, toward a rocky outcropping I'd marked as geologically interesting but hadn't explored. The entrance was hidden behind a constructed barrier. Not natural deadfall, deliberately placed logs, woven with branches, reinforced with stones. It looked like a wall until you knew what you were seeing. Then, it looked like a door. Cedar bark hinges. Actual hinges, made from strips of bark twisted into rope. The craftsmanship was crude but functional. It had been engineered to swing inward. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed danger. But I'd already crossed too many lines, documented too much to walk away without answers. I pulled the barrier aside and went in. My headlamp beam revealed a natural limestone cave, but modified. The floor had been cleared, leveled. The walls showed tool marks, something had widened passages, removed obstacles. 20 feet in, I found the first cache room. The organization was meticulous. Decades of collected objects arranged by type, age, material. Camping gear filled one section. Backpacks, tents, sleeping bags, all folded, stacked, preserved. Another section held personal items, wallets, keys, jewelry, watches, children's toys. Occupied their own heartbreaking corner dolls, action figures, a deflated basketball, countless stuffed animals. But the center display stopped me cold. Human artifacts arranged in concentric circles around sculptures made from bones and found objects. The bones weren't human, deer, elk, smaller animals, but assembled into humanoid forms, wrapped with clothing taken from the collected items, decorated with jewelry, watches, glasses, like primitive effigies or memorials. One wore a Forest Service cap, another had a child's friendship bracelet around its bone wrist, a third clutched a weathered teddy bear. I photographed everything, my camera flash seeming obscene in that space. Each flash revealed more details, dates on watches spanning 60 years, driver's licenses from 3 states, a logbook, partially legible, dated 1987. The journal was water damaged but readable in places. The handwriting started controlled, scientific. Day 12, additional. Structures discovered, pattern suggests territorial marking. But later entries descended into paranoia. They know I'm here. They've always known. They're waiting for something. The final entry was just one line. They're teaching the young ones about us. A sound from the entrance made me freeze. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, multiple sets. They stopped just outside, and I heard vocalizations, that same low, complex communication I'd recorded before. But now I recognized something in the patterns. They were discussing. Deciding. I turned off my headlamp and stood in absolute darkness, hand on bear spray I knew would be useless. My father's compass pressed against my chest through my shirt pocket. The footsteps entered the cave, but they stopped in the entrance, waited, more vocalizations, then something that sounded almost like laughter, deep, resonant, knowing. They were giving me a choice. Stay and face them, or leave and know they allowed it. I chose to leave. Walked out past shapes I could feel but couldn't see. Massive forms that smelled of pine pitch and something musky, wild. One reached out as I passed. I felt fingers brush my shoulder, gentle, almost careful. Then I was outside, in daylight that seemed impossible bright. When I turned back, the entrance was already being resealed. But pinned to a nearby tree was a message. My research permit, which had been in my locked cabin, attached with a bone pin. Below it, a single word drawn in mud: leave. The word was written in perfect English. I shouldn't have gone back into the cave. But the journal haunted me, those sketches that mirrored my experiences, that final line about teaching the young ones. I needed to document more before I left, before they made me leave. October 26th, 4 a.m. I slipped out while it was still dark, hoping their surveillance had gaps. The cave entrance had been partially reopened, like they knew I'd return, like they wanted me to. Deeper. Inside, past the first cache room, I found something worse. A second chamber, larger than the first. The walls were covered in drawings, charcoal, and ochre on limestone. Some were old, faded, maybe decades. Others looked fresh. They showed humans, hundreds of them. Different time periods based on clothing. Hikers with backpacks, loggers with chainsaws, families with children. All drawn with surprising accuracy, almost photographic detail. But the newest drawings showed me my cabin from every angle. My daily routines mapped out in sequential panels like a comic strip. Me sleeping, eating, working at my laptop. One drawing showed me finding the first structure, my expression of confusion captured perfectly. Another showed me leaving the offerings, counting out apples, measuring everything twice. At the center of the wall, a larger drawing. Me, in the cave, looking at the drawings of me, in the cave. They'd predicted this moment, planned for it. Below that, in the same, mud writing as the leave message. Words that made my skin crawl. You are the 43rd. 43rd, what? Researcher? Witness? Warning? I photographed everything, my flash illuminating more details with each shot. In the corner, I noticed recent additions to the artifact collection. A Forest Service radio, still functioning, the battery mysteriously full, a smartphone in a waterproof case, the screen cracked but showing 1 bar of signal impossible this deep in the mountains. And, most disturbing, a child's drawing, crayon on construction paper, showing a family of stick figures holding hands with a much larger dark figure. The child had labeled it, "My friend who lives in the woods." A sound echoed from deeper in the cave, not footsteps but something sliding, dragging. I turned to leave and found fresh offerings placed while I'd been distracted. My missing research permits, my backup GPS unit, and 3 photographs I didn't remember taking. My ex-fiancée, my mother, and one of my father from before he disappeared. Photos that had been in my wallet, in my locked cabin, in a drawer I hadn't opened since arriving. They knew everything about me. My loss, my isolation, my drive to find answers in the wilderness. They'd been reading me like I'd been trying to read them. I grabbed the photos and ran. Behind me, that sliding sound grew closer, accompanied by breathing that sounded almost labored. Sick. At the entrance, I turned back once. A shape filled the tunnel, massive, but wrong, moving unlike the others I'd glimpsed, dragging itself forward with arms too long, legs that didn't work right, and the smell: decay, infection, something dying. Outside, in the pre-dawn darkness, I heard them calling. Not the usual vocalizations, but something new. Urgent. Warning. Not threatening me, warning me about what was in the cave, what I'd disturbed. I made it back to my cabin as the sun rose. Found a new message, this time carved into my door with something sharp. "The sick one wakes. You brought this." My equipment registered unusual activity all day. Temperature drops, electromagnetic spikes, my radio picking up signals that weren't human voices but weren't static either. Something had changed. Something I'd triggered by going back. That afternoon, I found the first mutilated deer, torn apart but not eaten. Arranged in a pattern I recognized from the cave drawings. A message or a warning, maybe both. The 43rd. The sick one wakes. I was starting to understand I wasn't documenting a discovery. I was part of a pattern, a cycle, and I just accelerated it. They came for me that night. October 26th into the 27th, the darkest hours before dawn. It started with knocks. Not random tree strikes, but coordinated patterns, north, south, east, west, in sequence. Mathematical. 1 knock, then 2, then 3, then 5, then 8. The Fibonacci sequence. They were showing off, demonstrating, intelligence I couldn't dismiss as coincidence. The knocks got closer. The cabin walls vibrated with each impact. My equipment went haywire, cameras switching on and off, thermal readings spiking, my laptop screen flickering with static. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. Then the voices started. My voice, recorded and played back. Specimen 17. My ex-fiancée's laugh, though she'd never been here. My father's voice, calling my name, impossible, but unmistakable. They'd been collecting more than objects. They'd been collecting sounds, voices, pieces of human identity. A rock crashed through the window, precisely thrown to shatter glass without hitting me. Then another, and another. Each impact calculated to drive me to the cabin's center, away from walls, away from exits. I huddled there with my thermal camera, bear spray, and my father's compass. The thermal showed what my eyes couldn't. 4 large signatures surrounding the cabin, maintaining exact distances from each other. But a 5th signature worried me more. Larger, irregular, moving wrong. The sick one. The door handle turned, slowly, testing. The lock held, but wood splintered around the frame. Something was prying, patient but persistent. I heard breathing through the gaps, multiple sources, synchronized, like they were sharing lungs. My satellite phone buzzed. Impossible, no signal here. The screen showed a message in that same GPS coordinate format. Numbers that, when I checked later, corresponded to locations of missing person reports going back 40 years, dozens of them, all unsolved. The prying stopped, silence. Then something slammed into the roof, massive weight that buckled the ceiling. Footsteps above, methodical, testing each board. Dust rained down as nails pulled free. They were dismantling my shelter piece by piece. I activated my emergency beacon, knowing help was hours away at best. The response was immediate, the beacon was crushed, the signal dying mid-transmission. But they left my cameras running. They wanted me to document this. A section of roof peeled away, stars visible through the gap, then blocked by a face. Not quite ape, not quite human. Eyes that reflected my flashlight but showed intelligence, calculation, curiosity. It studied me like I'd studied those structures. Then it spoke not vocalization, but actual words, accented and distorted but clear. You, go, now, or stay, forever. The thermal camera captured what happened next. The sick one approached from the woods, and the others reacted with what looked like fear. They abandoned the cabin, calling to each other in rapid, complex patterns. The sick one was massive, nearly 9 feet tall, but moved wrong, lurching, dragging, suffering. The thermal showed its body temperature was wrong too, patches of heat and cold like infection or disease. It reached the cabin and did something the others hadn't. It knocked 3 times, politely, waiting. I opened the door. Don't ask me why. Maybe because polite monsters are scarier than violent ones. Maybe because I needed to see. It stood there, breathing hard, and I understood. The drawings in the cave, the pattern of 43 witnesses, the cycle I'd accelerated. This was what happened to those who stayed too long, who learned too much. The transformation wasn't instant. It was gradual, generational, inevitable. The sick one had been human once. Recently, based on the North Face jacket it still wore, tattered and stretched over its transformed frame. It looked at me with eyes that held human intelligence trapped in an inhuman face. It spoke one word, clear despite its distorted throat. Run. So I did. Grabbed my essential data drives and ran. Behind me, the others returned, surrounding the sick one. I heard sounds that might have been comfort or might have been mourning. I didn't stop running until dawn. 3 nights of siege, October 27th through the 30th. They tested every weakness, probed every defense, learned my patterns while demonstrating theirs. Night 1, they took my equipment. I watched through the window as they dismantled my trail cameras with the precision of technicians. They understood the latches, the battery compartments, the memory card slots. One of them, smaller, maybe adolescent, held up a camera and looked through the viewfinder, mimicking my posture exactly. They arranged the cameras in a circle, lenses facing inward, creating their own documentation setup. The thermal imaging through my cabin window showed 4 distinct heat signatures, each maintaining specific positions. Alpha, the largest, stayed 20 meters back, observing. 2 others, I called them the twins for their synchronized movements, flanked the cabin. The 4th, the adolescent, seemed to be learning, copying the others' actions with slight delays. They threw rocks with sniper precision. Not to hurt to communicate. 1 rock hitting the north wall meant movement to the south. 2 rocks meant they were about to vocalize. 3 rocks preceded each attempt to open the door. They were teaching me their language while showing they'd learned mine. Night 2. The mimicry escalated. They'd recorded me somehow, not just my voice, but specific phrases. Specimen number 4, October 19th, 2019, played from 3 directions at once. My ex-fiance's voicemail greeting, word perfect, echoed from the forest. Then my father's voice, which should have been impossible, he'd disappeared before digital recording was common. They had archives, decades of human voices. The adolescent came closest, pressing its face against my window. In the thermal, I could see its features clearly, more human than the others, the brow less pronounced, the eyes rounder. It placed its hand against the glass, fingers spread, and waited. When I didn't respond, it tapped 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. The Fibonacci sequence again. It was testing me, seeing if I understood. I placed my hand against its print. The size difference was shocking, but the gesture seemed to satisfy it. It made a sound not threatening, almost pleased before rejoining the others. They demonstrated their technology that night. Crude but functional tools appeared at my doorstep. A knife napped from obsidian, sharper than surgical steel. A rope braided from cedar bark that could hold hundreds of pounds. A container woven so tight it held water. They were showing me they didn't need our technology. They had their own. Night 3. Everything changed. The sick one returned. The others scattered when it approached, their heat signatures literally cooling with what looked like fear. It moved differently than before, more coordinated, but somehow more wrong. Through the thermal, I could see its body temperature fluctuating wildly. Hot spots that suggested fever or infection. Cold spots that looked necrotic. It spoke through the door. Full sentences now, though each word seemed to cost it. Daniel, Harrington, your father, says. Hello. My hand found his compass in my pocket. The sick one continued. He did not run fast enough. 43 years. Too long. The math hit me like a physical blow. 43 years. My father had disappeared when I was 12, which would have been. The sick one was him. Transformed, twisted, but somehow, him. The change takes time. You still can leave. The others returned then, surrounding the sick one, my father, with what looked like protective intent. They vocalized in complex patterns, and he responded in kind, his human voice mixing with their language. They were family, pack, tribe. The alpha approached the door and did something unexpected. It knocked politely, like a neighbor visiting. When I didn't respond, it spoke. The words barely recognizable but unmistakable. Son, go, now, please. Not my father's voice. The alpha's own attempt at human speech. It was pleading. They retreated before dawn, but not before leaving one final gift. My father's wallet, the one he'd carried when he disappeared. Inside, a photo of me at 12, preserved perfectly. The message was clear. Leave or become like him. October 31st. The morning after the third night, I discovered my satellite phone had been repaired. Not just reassembled, but improved. The signal was impossibly strong, 5 bars in a dead zone. But when I tried to call out, I heard them breathing on the line. They'd hacked it somehow, turned it into another monitoring device. I found a gift at my door that changed everything. A map drawn in mud and charcoal on a piece of bark, showing the entire valley in surprising detail. My cabin was marked with an X. Other symbols dotted the landscape: circles, triangles, squares, at least 30 locations. Some had dates written in that same mud script: 1976, 1983, 1995, 2001, 2019. The pattern became clear. Each symbol marked an encounter site. The dates showed a progression, moving deeper into human territory over decades. They weren't retreating from civilization, they were studying it, learning from each contact. One location was marked with a star and the word begin. Coordinates I recognized, the exact spot where my father had disappeared. I spent the morning trying to reach anyone on the radio. Static. The satellite phone only connected to dead air. My emergency beacon remained crushed, but my laptop worked, and I had enough battery to review everything I documented. The evidence was overwhelming but useless. Who would believe it? Thermal footage of large primates, audio recordings of complex vocalizations, photos of structures and artifacts. Any scientist would dismiss it as elaborate hoaxing. The transformative element, the sick one, my father, that would be labeled as delusion. Around noon, they left another gift: my research equipment, neatly arranged on the porch. Every piece accounted for, memory cards intact, batteries charged, a gesture of good faith, or a final warning: take your things and go. But there was more. New memory cards had been added, labeled in that mud writing with numbers. I loaded the first one. It contained footage from their perspective. Hidden cameras or something equivalent, showing decades of human encounters, hikers who'd gotten too close, researchers like me who'd found evidence, children who'd wandered into the woods and been carefully herded back to safety, and the transformations, 13 documented cases over 60 years. People who'd stayed too long, learned too much, crossed some invisible threshold. The progression was always the same: initial contact, escalating exchanges, the revelation of intelligence, then the change. Gradual at first, bone density increasing, muscle mass expanding, neural pathways rewiring. The final stage taking years, sometimes decades. Card 3 showed my father's transformation in time-lapse. Photos taken from hidden angles over years. The widening of his frame, the elongation of his limbs, his face gradually becoming unrecognizable while his eyes retained that horrible humanity. The last images showed him teaching the adolescent, his grandchild, how to use tools. They'd been documenting us the way we document endangered species. The final card contained video dated just hours ago. The sick one, my father speaking directly to the camera in moments of clarity. "Daniel, if you're seeing this, you're already too involved. They let me record this because they want you to understand. We're not separate species. We're the same species at different stages. Evolution doesn't just work forward. Sometimes it responds to environment, to pressure, to need. They're not Sasquatch or Bigfoot or monsters. They're us, adapted to a world that required them to become something else." He paused, struggling with, "The change isn't forced, it's invited. By staying, by learning, by accepting their gifts, you begin the process. You're already changing, son. Check your hands." I looked down. My fingers seemed longer, the gaps between them wider. Perception or reality? I couldn't tell anymore. The video continued. "You have maybe 72 hours before it's irreversible. They'll let you leave. They want you to leave. But part of you won't want to. That's the beginning of the change, the desire to stay, to learn more, to join them." Static, then his final words. "Run, Daniel. Run like I should have." I looked out the window. They stood at the tree line, 5 of them, including my father, waiting, watching, giving me one last chance to choose. November 1st. I ran, but the forest had changed. The main trail to my truck, the one I'd hiked dozens of times, was gone. Not overgrown or hard to find. Gone. Where the trailhead should have been, a massive Douglas fir lay across. The path, easily 4 feet in diameter. The thing was, I'd walked past that exact tree standing upright just 3 days earlier. The root ball was fresh, dirt still damp, but no storm had touched this area. They'd pulled it down. Somehow. I tried the secondary trail, the steeper one that connected to Forest Service Road 2314. Blocked. This time by a deliberate construction logs woven together with that same cedar bark rope, creating a wall 12 feet high. The craftsmanship was hurried, rough, but effective. Fresh sap still bled from the cuts. They were hurting me. Every path I knew led to barriers. Some subtle fallen trees that looked natural until you noticed the tool marks. Others, obvious structures built to turn me back. They wanted me to leave, but only along the route they'd chosen. I followed their path. What choice did I have? The new trail was older than anything on my maps. Worn smooth by decades, maybe centuries of use. My GPS showed me, moving through areas marked as impassable cliff faces, but the path wound through hidden passes, behind waterfall curtains, through gaps in the rock invisible until you were right on them. 3 hours in, I found their workshop. A natural depression in the forest floor, hidden by overhanging cedars. Tools everywhere, stone blades, wooden handles, bone needles. Works in progress. A half-finished structure that looked like a smaller version of what I'd found at my camp, baskets in various stages of completion, and something that disturbed me more than anything, trail cameras. My trail cameras, partially disassembled, arranged like they were being studied, but the worst part was the teaching station. Smaller tools, child-sized, with what looked like practice pieces, clumsy attempts at the same construction techniques. They were passing knowledge to the next generation. My equipment was becoming part of their curriculum. Something moved in my peripheral vision. The adolescent, watching from behind a tree. Not threatening, just observing. It held something, one of my notebooks. As I watched, it opened it, ran a massive finger along my handwriting, mimicking the motion of writing. It was learning to read. I backed away slowly, and it let me go. Even tilted its head in what might have been a goodbye. The path continued, and I found more evidence of their intelligence. Wooden mechanisms I couldn't quite understand, lever systems, pulleys made from vine and wood, something that might have been a primitive calendar marking moon phases. They'd been developing technology parallel to ours, adapted to their world. Near what I thought was the exit, I found the trap. Not meant to harm, meant to demonstrate. A deadfall trigger so precisely balanced that breathing on it would release the mechanism. But the log that would fall was actually painted with ochre and charcoal with images. Stick figures representing humans, larger figures representing, for them, and between them, A series of transformation images showing the progression from one to the other. They wanted me to understand the threat wasn't violence, it was becoming them. I carefully stepped around the trap and found my truck 200 meters ahead. Intact but modified. The hood was open, and components had been rearranged, nothing damaged, but everything studied. My spare equipment in the cab was laid out on the ground in categories: metal, plastic, fabric, electronic. They'd been learning about our materials, our construction methods, but they'd left the keys in the ignition. The engine started on the first try. As I loaded what I could grab quickly, I saw them, all 5, standing at the tree line. The sick one, my father raised a hand. A wave or a warning, I couldn't tell. The others just watched, still as statues. The adolescent stepped forward and placed something on a stump, my father's compass, the one I'd carried all these years, that I hadn't even realized I'd dropped. I took it and left everything else behind. The ranger station at Darrington was 40 miles out, but I drove 60 before I felt safe enough to stop. Found a Forest Service substation, little more than a shack with a radio tower. The ranger on duty, a kid maybe 25, took one look at me and called for backup. Not because I was raving, because I was too calm. 47 miles in for 3 weeks, I told him. Wildlife study. Equipment malfunction. Need to report some unusual wildlife activity. Sheriff Tom Brennan arrived within an hour, all forced smiles and campaign season charm. Election signs with his face plastered every surface in town. Protect and serve Skagit County, under a photo that was at least 10 years old. Dr. Harrington, he said. Too loud, too friendly. Heard you had quite an adventure up there. I showed him the photos on my camera. The structures first, those he dismissed as environmentalist art projects. The footprint casts, bear tracks in soft mud, happens all the time. The thermal imaging, elk, maybe. Video gets weird in cold weather. He laughed at everything. That nervous laugh that tried to make me feel foolish. But he wouldn't look directly at the screen. His eyes kept sliding away, especially from the clearer images. You know, he said, isolation does things to people. 3 weeks alone, that's rough on anyone. Your mind starts playing tricks. Shadows become monsters. You ever talk to someone about anxiety? Stress? I stayed clinical, professional. Showed him the evidence of intelligence, the tools, the deliberate constructions, the cave full of human artifacts. His laughter got louder with each piece of evidence, more forced. Missing persons effects, I said. Dozens of them, going back decades. You know how many hikers lose gear out there? Storms scatter things for miles. You probably found an old homeless camp or something. But when I mentioned the sod, journal from 1987, his whole demeanor shifted, just for a second, a flash of recognition before the politician's mask slipped back on. That's enough, he said. You're exhausted, dehydrated, maybe suffering from exposure. I'm recommending you get checked at the hospital. Make sure you're okay. That's when the Forest Service supervisor appeared in the doorway. Older man, graying, the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in the field. He'd been listening. Sheriff's right, he said carefully. You should get checked out. But first, might I have a word? Professional courtesy? Researcher to researcher? Brennan's jaw tightened. Ted, this isn't your jurisdiction. Federal land, Tom. Actually, it is. They stared at each other for a long moment. Some old tension there, some history. Finally, Brennan stood. Get some help, Dr. Harrington. That's official advice. What you're describing, it's stress. Nothing more. And I'd hate for professional way. Embarrassment to impact your career. These kinds of stories, they follow people. The threat was subtle but clear. After he left, the supervisor, Ted, locked the door. Show me everything, he said. And I mean everything. But first, turn off your phone. Take the battery out if you can. I did. He pulled out a device I didn't recognize, swept it around the room, then nodded. We have maybe 10 minutes before someone notices I'm here, he said. What you found, you're not the first, you won't be the last. But you might be the first to walk away with evidence intact. He pulled out a tablet, entered a long password, and showed me a file. Cascades Anomaly Assessment, 1974. Classified under the Wildlife Resource Protection Act, which doesn't exist publicly. The file contained reports going back to the 30s, detailed encounters, biological assessments, even speculation about breeding populations. And a conclusion that chilled me. Recommend continued suppression protocols. Public awareness would result in uncontrolled hunting, habitat destruction, and potential species extinction. Secondary concern. Evidence suggests prolonged contact results in biological changes to human subjects. Mechanism unknown. Risk assessment. Extreme. They're real, I said. Quote, never said they weren't. But that reality comes with conditions. You can leave now, keep quiet, continue your career. Or you can push this and become another casualty of equipment failure or wilderness accident. Your choice. He stood to leave, then paused. Your father, William Harrington, reported missing November 1976. One of our rangers found his camp. And other things. Things that suggested he didn't exactly leave. The words I dreaded. Is he? Missing, Ted said firmly. That's the official status. That's all I can say. Destroy your evidence or hide it. But don't publish. They watch for that. They? The government? He almost smiled. The government's the least of your concerns, son. Ted's tablet showed me things I wish I hadn't seen. File after file, dated and cataloged. The 1996 incident he'd mentioned an entire ranger team, 4 people, gone during a routine trail maintenance mission. The official report cited avalanche. The classified version included photos of their equipment arranged in those same ritualistic patterns and one ranger's body camera showing massive figures surrounding their camp before the feed cut out. This is from 2008, Ted said, scrolling to another file. Park naturalist, 30 years experience. Started reporting structures, unusual primate behavior. We tried to extract her quietly. She refused. 3 weeks later, search and rescue found her clothes folded neatly on a rock. Never found a body. The transformation cases were worse. 13 confirmed over 60 years. But Ted suspected more. We don't know the mechanism, he said. Viral? Genetic? Psychological? The few tissue samples we've obtained show human DNA, but with anomalies, extra chromosomes, activated genes that should be dormant, cellular changes we can't explain. He showed me a photograph from 1982, a hunter who'd gone missing, photographed through a scope by his own brother 2 years later. Still recognizable, but changed elongated limbs, thickened brow, body hair that wasn't quite fur. The brother had been institutionalized after insisting he'd seen his sibling living with the forest people. Your father's case was unique, Ted said carefully. He made contact, established communication. His notes, what we recovered, suggested they were teaching him, not hunting him, not threatening him. Teaching. Teaching what? How to survive as one of them. The structures, the food gathering, the social hierarchy. He documented it all until Ted paused, until his handwriting started changing. Larger letters, clumsier grip. The final entries were just drawings. He showed me one of my father's sketches. Crude but clear, a human figure progressively growing, changing, surrounded by larger figures that seemed to be helping, supporting the transformation. We think it's voluntary, Ted said. At some level, the person has to choose it. Accept it. That's why they're selective about who they approach. They're not randomly taking people. They're recruiting. The 43rd, I said, remembering the cave message. Ted nodded. 43 successful contacts that didn't result in transformation. You walked away. That's rare. But my father didn't. No. The evidence suggests he embraced it. His final coherent note said, "They're not what we think. They're what we were. What we could be again." Ted closed the tablet, looked at me directly. "I'm telling you this because you have a choice. Destroy your evidence, forget this happened, live your life, or pursue it and end up like the others discredited, disappeared, or transformed. There's no middle ground." "What about publication? Anonymous release? WikiLeaks?" He almost laughed. "You think we haven't had leaks?" 3 major attempts in the last decade. Each one dismissed as hoax, deep fakes, mental illness. The media won't touch it without official confirmation, and that will never come. Because of public panic? Partly, but mostly because we don't understand them well enough to protect them. Imagine hunters with thermal scopes, trophy seekers, scientists who want live specimens. It would be genocide. And there's another concern. He pulled out a personal phone, showed me a video, shaky footage from a game camera. This is from last month. Eastern Washington. The video showed what looked like a suburban backyard. A swing set, a garden, typical family space. Then, movement. A massive figure emerged from the tree line, approached a child's sandbox. It carefully arranged toys in a pattern, then retreated. The timestamp showed 3 a.m. "They're getting bolder," Ted said. "Coming closer to populated areas. We think they're looking for something. Or someone." "The 43rd, I said again, understanding. "People who've made contact but left. They track them, not aggressively, but persistently, like they're waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Ted put away his phone. "For them to come back. The transformation isn't forced, Dr. Harrington. But once you've been chosen, marked, whatever you want to call it, the invitation remains open." He stood to leave. "Hide your evidence. Multiple locations, encrypted, dead man switches, if you're paranoid, but don't use it. They're watching. They're always watching." "Who? The government?" "No," Ted said, opening the door. "Them. November 3rd, I went back for my equipment. Stupid, maybe, but $200,000 of university property doesn't just disappear without consequences. Plus, I needed closure. Proof that it really happened. The Forest Service arranged an escort, 2 rangers, both armed, neither happy about it. Rangers Rodriguez and Patel, both young, both skeptical. They'd been told I'd had a wildlife encounter and needed security to retrieve research equipment. The drive-in felt different. The forest seemed denser, shadows deeper. Rodriguez kept checking her mirrors, muttering about feeling watched. Patel gripped his rifle tighter with each mile. We had to walk the last 2 miles. Trees had fallen across the road. Not the careful barriers from before. These were violent, splintered, like something had torn them down in rage or grief. My cabin was gone, not destroyed, disassembled. Every board pulled apart and stacked by size, every nail removed and sorted. The metal roofing rolled into perfect cylinders. It looked like a deconstruction site, organized with obsessive precision. My equipment was arranged in the clearing where the cabin had stood. Cameras in one section, computers. In another, sampling kits in a third. Everything cleaned, some things repaired. My laptop, which had been glitching, now worked perfectly. My broken GPS unit was fixed with handmade parts, wood, and plant fiber, replacing plastic, but functional. In the center, they'd built something new, a structure similar to the ones I'd first found, but more elaborate. Inside, arranged on that woven platform, were my memory cards, my backup drives, my field notebooks, everything containing evidence, and a new addition, a leather bundle, brain-tanned hide tied with sinew. Inside, more memory cards, older technology, some formats I didn't recognize. These weren't mine. Rodriguez stayed by the truck. 5 minutes, then we leave. But Patel followed me, saw the arrangement. "This is..." He stopped, stared. "What did this?" "I don't know," I lied. He walked the perimeter, examining the sorted materials. "This would take a crew days. The organization, the categories, and these structures. I've seen these before. Different locations, but same design." "You have?" He nodded. "Never reported it. Figured it was some art project or religious thing. But there's intelligence here. Purpose." That's when we heard it. A low whistle from the trees. Then another, answering from the opposite direction. Patel raised his rifle. "Don't," I said. "They're just watching." "They?" More whistles surrounding us. Rodriguez was shouting from the truck, engine starting. But I saw them, just for a moment. All 5, standing among the trees. My father was in the center, more changed than before. The transformation was accelerating. He stepped forward, just enough to be clearly visible. Rodriguez was screaming now, but Patel stood frozen. My father held something up, a small wooden carving. Even from distance, I could see what it was. A human figure, detailed, carefully made. He set it on a stump and retreated. I retrieved it as we left. It was me, carved with impossible accuracy. Every detail of my face, my posture, even the way I hold my father's compass. On the base, carved in tiny letters, "Door always open." Patel didn't speak the entire drive out. At the station, he pulled me aside. "The video," he said. "From your camera, I saw it over your shoulder. That thing that stepped forward, it was wearing clothes. Human clothes, just stretched out. Wrong. Trick of the light," I said. "No. I've seen missing person reports. That jacket, North Face, blue and gray. Guy named William Harrington wore one just like it when he disappeared in '76. I said nothing. That was your father, wasn't it? Changed, but still him. You wouldn't believe me if I said yes. Patel looked back toward the mountains. There are stories, tribal legends, old hunter tales, things that were human once but chose to become something else. I thought they were metaphors. Maybe they are, I said. He handed me his card. If you ever want to, talk about what really happened. Off the record. I took the card but knew I'd never call. Some stories can't be shared. They can only be lived with. We loaded what we could salvage. I kept the wooden carving, the leather bundle, and my father's compass. Everything else, the evidence that could destroy careers, end lives, reveal impossible truths I left behind. They'd won. Or maybe we both had. The door was open, but I was choosing not to walk through it. Yet. 6 months later. Seattle. May 2020. I'm recording this from my apartment in Wallingford, 3 miles from the University of Washington campus where I no longer work. Officially, I'm on sabbatical. Unofficially, I can't enter a forest without hyperventilating. The evidence is hidden: 3 safety deposit boxes, 2 encrypted cloud servers, 1 physical cache only I know about. Ted was right about the dead man switches. If something happens to me, everything releases. Not that it matters. I've seen what happens to whistleblowers in this field. Discredited, dismissed, disappeared. I tried returning to normal. Taught 1 semester. Published a paper on bear denning patterns using old data. But I couldn't focus. Every crack of a branch outside made me freeze. Tree knocks in Discovery Park sent me running. I started seeing patterns everywhere, sticks arranged too precisely, rocks stacked too deliberately. The wooden carving sits on my desk, my father's compass beside it. Constants in a world that no longer makes sense. 3 weeks ago, the gifts started again. First, a perfectly round stone on my 3rd floor balcony. Then, feathers arranged in a star pattern by my apartment door. Last week, I found my missing field notebook, the one I'd left at the cabin, placed on my car windshield. They shouldn't be able to find me here. Seattle's population is 700,000, but they do. Or maybe they never lost me. I've started documenting urban observations, unusual stick arrangements in Ravenna Park, impossibly large footprints in muddy spots along Burke-Gilman Trail, reports of homeless camps that disappear overnight, leaving only carefully sorted materials behind. They're adapting, moving closer. The transformation isn't just biological, it's sociological. They're learning to live alongside us, hidden in plain sight. Patel emails sometimes, reports sightings he can't explain. Rodriguez quit the Forest Service, moved to Arizona. Ted retired early, sent me 1 message. They found my safety deposit box. Be careful. My hands are changing. Subtle, but undeniable. Fingers slightly longer, gaps between them wider. My night vision has improved. Sometimes I understand patterns in bird calls that should be meaningless. The transformation isn't just for those who stay. It follows those who leave. Yesterday, I saw him, my father, or what he's become, standing in the small woodlot visible from my window. 3 a.m., rain falling, but he stood motionless for an hour, watching, waiting. I wanted to go to him. That's the terrifying part. Despite everything, despite the fear and the impossibility, part of me wanted to walk downstairs, cross the street, and join him. The door remains open. I check the woodlot every morning now. New structures appear weekly. Small, subtle, but undeniable. Messages in a language I'm beginning to understand. They're patient. They've been patient for decades, maybe centuries. And they know something I'm starting to accept. You can leave the forest, but if it's chosen you, you carry it with you forever. I still take my anxiety medication. Still see my therapist, who thinks I'm processing trauma through elaborate metaphor. Still pretend to plan next year's research projects. But I also keep a bag packed. Water, food, warm clothes, just in case. Just in case I finally answer their invitation, the 43rd who walked away. But for how long? If you find this account, you'll probably dismiss it. Stress, isolation, mental breakdown. That's fine. Safer that way. But if you've seen the structures, heard the knocks, felt those eyes watching from the tree line, you already know. The door is open. It's always been open. The question is, when will you walk through?